What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of DGen Download. We have a really awesome guest on this episode. We have Michael Vega-Sanz, and Michael is the co-founder of Lula, co-founder of Gale, and Gale actually just had a pretty significant seed fundraise. Just for some context, Michael, you were actually on my first podcast, I think like 8 years ago now, or 7 or 8 years ago, and we can get into that, but you guys are in a totally different state now than when you were back then. So let me just hand it over to you. Give us a little bit of context on kind of what you do and what you've been up to over these last few years.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I remember that first time that we spoke. At the time I was living in Cambridge, I was actually living in a building called a Regatta. And it's funny, it's an old building. So back in 2003, something like that, apparently the Winklevoss twins lived there also, and they got kicked out. But at the time I was running a business called Lula Rides. And Lula Rides was think Turo, but just for college students. So it was an app that allowed college kids to rent cars from other college kids. And that app, it was the first platform in the US that allowed people under the age of 25 to rent cars without restrictions. Ben, I think you may remember that app went viral and it became one of the top apps on the App Store for a small period of time. And ultimately, I withdrew from school and I spent the next year or two building out that trying to build out that business and that company with my brother. When the pandemic hit and college campuses shut down, the business ultimately died. That was a big lesson for me where I learned there's a big difference between building a good product and a good business. So I thought we built a really good product, but we didn't build a really good business. And so in the start of the pandemic, I started to think about this insurance infrastructure that we built for ourselves as we were starting the business, the ability to provide insurance on every rental, the ability to make sure that when somebody signs up, it's not this crazy lunatic with a long track record of felonies, the ability to manage your policies digitally. And if, God forbid, one of the vehicles gets involved in a claim, able to manage your claim from end to end by triaging that to a third party. We thought that's a really powerful tool that could potentially be used by car rental companies and trucking companies and other businesses. And that's what started Lula. And the craziest thing happened. The United States military was looking to launch the same program we launched on college campuses. They wanted to launch on military bases. Now, those may seem like very different things, but military bases are very similar to college campuses in that they have 18, 19, 20-year-olds that don't have cars but want to do things. So we jumped on a call with them. They went ahead and they said, how the hell did you guys get insurance coverage for 18 and 19-year-olds? And we went ahead and gave them every single secret possible. On that first call, I was naive. I didn't think that anything was going to happen. I just wanted to help. And at the end of the call, they said, how much is this going to cost us? And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, yeah, we don't have anybody internally that can do any of this stuff for us. And that was the start of what became known as Lula. And so Lula became an insurance platform where car rental companies, trucking companies, ride-hailing platforms could essentially purchase and get all of their insurance needs. They could purchase insurance through that. They can go ahead and use risk management tools to see if somebody's high risk or low risk. They could process all of their claims through that. And so we came to be known as Stripe for insurance. In the same way that Stripe eliminates the need for businesses to build payment infrastructure, we eliminated the need for companies to build insurance infrastructure. And that business, in less than 3 years, grew from zero to about $50 million in annual revenues. And we were very fortunate. We raised around $45 million in capital from Peter Thiel and Founders Fund, Vinod Khosla, Khosla Ventures, Bill Ackman, Steve Pagliuca, and a ton of other really awesome folks. And then that business, we had an opportunity to exit the business about a year ago. And my brother and I ended up starting a company called Gale. And Gale, we thought somebody's going to introduce AI.
Wait, sorry, Michael, let me actually just, before we go into Gale, I mean, you just said some kind of crazy stuff about Lula there. I mean, so it's so funny because when we were talking like 7, 8 years ago, it was like a cool business, right? But it was, it's not really the type of business like just a kind of like college ride sharing that can grow to like those kinds of numbers. And then the pivot is really when everything changed for you. I'm just curious, like, how did you get plugged in with Peter Thiel, with Bill Ackman, with Khosla, like, because I've been seeing and just following on your Instagram and on LinkedIn, like you're plugged in and connected with like some of the highest level people really in the world in like the tech space. I'm just curious, like how are you able to make those connections and how did that happen?
There's a couple of different things. When I was in college, one thing my mom and my dad always told me and always pushed me was be the type of person that takes advice. And if I identify somebody that is in a position that I want to be in one day, reach out to them. And so since I got into college, I was reaching out to people that were CEOs, executives, successful founders. And I would say, hey, I'm a college student. I'm trying to go ahead and do this, or I want to be in your position one day. And I even do that to this day. And I would often ask them for coffee or for drinks or for dinner or something. And so when I got to college, I had no network. But I would go ahead and I would send a lot of these emails and I would send a lot of these messages. And little by little, I started to meet a couple of these folks. What I find that people typically do, because now a lot of people do it to me and it's really annoying, I have no problem jumping on a call, giving some advice, helping somebody think through some things. I actually really like it. And I think most people like it. It feels good to do good. But one of the really annoying things is if, Ben, you reach out to me, you take 60 minutes of my time, I give you all of these thoughts and all of these pieces of advice, and then I run into you 6 months or 12 months later, and you just didn't do anything that I told you. That's really freaking annoying. I'm going to be like, well, I'm never going to talk to you again. You just wasted an hour of my time. So one
Yeah.
thing that I would do is I would reach out to these people. I would meet them. I would be genuinely curious about how did they get to where they are today? What would they do if they were in my position? What books are they reading? What things are they looking at? What are they paying
What
attention
did
to?
the initial like outreach look like to these people though? Like, are you saying like, hey, I'm starting this company, I want some advice, I'm really impressed with your background, or what did you write?
It depends the context. When I was a student, initially when I was a student, I thought I wanted to go into the investment banking world. I thought I wanted to go into the investment world. Then eventually I thought I wanted to go into the product world. So I would reach out to somebody, say somebody that's a product manager at a company like, I don't know, Priceline. A Priceline was big in Boston. So I would reach out to somebody there or HubSpot and I would say, hey, I think what you're doing with product is really cool. I think the fact that you are a product manager, you're the VP of product at HubSpot, and you have this background and you've done that background is really interesting to me. And I would love to learn, how did you actually get there? What was your career path? I would look at alumni that went to Babson, guys that owned hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in real estate, and I would say, hey, I'm a student at Babson. I'm an alumni. You're an alumni from my school. I want to know, how did you get to where you are today? And I would go ahead and send really good emails. That's a really big skill, sending really good personal emails. Most people that I know that are in these positions actually read their emails. I actually read my email. So anybody that sends me an email, I typically will read it. And if it's a really well written email, I will go ahead and respond and sometimes catch up with folks. And I
So
know
you're
most
like
people like,
personalizing that email to the specific person you were writing to, and then you basically were kind of putting them in some type of acknowledgement of what they had accomplished, and then framing, that you were interested in, learning from them, and
yep.
they would potentially be giving back to you in almost like a, not charity, but some type of like benevolent way by taking some time to work with you or talk
Yeah,
to you.
you're exactly correct. There's actually there's a theory behind it. And I wasn't doing it at this time. I didn't know about it, but it's called the Ben Franklin effect, which is if you want somebody to like you, just ask them to do something for you. And it comes from something that Ben Franklin wrote about, which is when he wanted somebody to like him, one of the things that he would do is actually ask them for a book. If he had somebody who was his enemy, he would often ask them for a book. So, anyways, you're exactly correct. I would reach out, and you would be amazed at the places I got to. I remember one time there was a guy called Bill Cummings out of Boston. This guy's a billionaire out of Boston. He owns a ton of real estate. He came and spoke at Babson, and I told a couple of my friends, "Oh my gosh, I want to have lunch with this guy." And they told me, like, there's no way this guy was going to answer your email. And sure enough, 3 days later, I was in his office having lunch with him.
Wow.
Wow. And so that's what I would do. And then 6 months later, I would go ahead and reach out to them and say, hey, look at what I did. I listened to your advice and look how it worked for me. And when I was building my first company, Lula Rides, I went ahead and, to Ben's point, it was a really exciting business. It got some attention. I met a lot of venture capitalists and interesting people through that route. And almost all of them did not invest in me. As a matter of fact, almost all of them declined me. And I remember one day I was complaining to one of my lawyer that was helping me out. And he said to me, did they say no to you, or did they say no to the business right now? That's fundamentally different. They could just not like your business, but maybe they really like you and they believe in you. And so when I was in Boston, I would go ahead and foster these relationships. I would tell somebody, hey, I'd send them the email, say, I'm going to be in New York on Tuesday. If they responded, then I would figure out how I'm going to be in New York on Tuesday. But I would put myself out there. I made myself a big target for luck. And so to give you just an interesting story, in 2017, Lula Rides starts to get some traction. I meet with the Next Few Ventures team. They're a Boston firm. One of the co-founders of LinkedIn is the general partner there. They passed on us. In 2018, the app goes viral. Again, they passed on us. And in the summer of 2020, I'm on Twitter and I see Lee Hauer, who's the general partner at NextView. He's one of the co-founders of LinkedIn. He says something on Twitter like, despite the pandemic, we're still investing in this economy. And I said, okay, I'm going to reach out to him. We have this pivot. Maybe he likes this business more. I gave the worst pitch of my life, and 48 hours later, he made an offer to invest.
Wow.
And so I always tell founders, you may want to go ahead and tell an investor, fuck you. It feels really good to give them the middle finger and to say something stupid if they reject you or they decline you.
Yeah.
But you never know where you're going to be 2, 3, 4 years from now. Every single investor that I told you about, Coastal Ventures, Founders Fund, Peter Thiel, all of those folks passed on us at least once or twice before they invested in us. And
So I had a quick question just before we get too much further down the road. I think your story is obviously very impressive. I think a lot of people listening to this, are probably smart and they have, ideas. And obviously you had 2 really big ideas, that you've been able to execute, very effectively. Do you have a technical background, or what is your kind of background? And I guess just like, what was the story of kind of how you built like those initial applications? Because obviously the initial app, the ride sharing cars, you had to build that infrastructure. It seems like as like a college student or a recent grad, which is impressive. And then now you're obviously in kind of the AI space. Do you have advice to people on how to build things who maybe aren't technical, or how can they kind of scale something if they have an idea similar to what you did?
Yeah, I wasn't technical when I first started. I was a business major at Babson, so I wasn't technical by any means. I started to become more and more technical over time. I started taking courses on Team Treehouse or Code Academy, things like that. My brother really was the one that was much more technical than me. And he's the one that did most of call it the tech work. But over time, I've become more and more technical. Relative to an average person, I would say I'm technical. Relative to an engineer from MIT, I would not say I'm technical. But as it pertains to the question that you had, Dakota, it ultimately comes down to, in my opinion, in terms of I've had 3 companies, call it, maybe not all from a business perspective, they were a hit, but from a product perspective or from a traction perspective, they were a hit. It sounds easy. It's simple, but it's not easy, which is go ahead and identify problems. And I think a lot of people go ahead and they work on identifying a solution, or they fall in love with a solution, but they don't fall in love with the problem. And I've never been married to the solution. I'm married to the problem. And I think if you think about the best businesses today, or the best businesses of all time, they are problem-solving machines. If you look at Amazon, if you look at SpaceX, if you look at Tesla, if you look at Apple, all of them are really, really good at solving problems. Amazon, you want to get a box, you want to get socks, or you want to get food, or you want to get basically whatever you want in the next 24 hours, just press this button. They figured it all out for you.
Yeah.
I think that's great advice, obviously addressing the problem and, working from the problem and kind of framing the problem. Once you've identified, like these problems, like the students needing rides, or, the difficulty with getting insurance, what is your first month? Like, okay, you've identified this huge problem. There's like a big gap here in the market. Like, what do you do? Like, you start coding the app? Do you hire a developer? So many people just yeah.
The first thing that I do to this day is you go ahead and you put together some sort of hypothesis. So you go ahead and you say, I identified a problem. I think this is a potential solution to that problem. Let me go ahead and validate whether the market wants that solution or not. Or if they don't want the solution, what is the solution that maybe works here? And I'll give you an example. When we were first thinking about Lula Rides, we had this idea for an app that allowed college kids to rent cars from other college kids. Now, before we wrote one single line of code, we went ahead and tried to validate that idea. I went ahead and I went to a ton of car owners and I said, hey, if somebody was willing to pay you $10, $20 per hour, would you be willing to rent your car? I went to other college students on campus and I said, hey, would you be willing to rent Eric's car for $10 or $20 an hour, or for $30 a day? And I'll never forget, the first car rental that we ever had was for a roommate of mine called Eric Morandi, and he lent his car out for $20 to 4 Europeans that were exchange students there. And over the course of that week, he got maybe 3 or 4 rentals. And there was another guy, one of my older roommates called Mark. Mark also got a couple of rentals. And so the first thing that we do before we go ahead and write a line of code or anything like that is we try to go ahead and validate that idea. The second business, the one that we're talking about with Lula, we had almost immediately that opportunity with the US military. But before we went ahead and really solidified that and moved to actually building it, I went to a couple of car rental companies car rental companies that we had worked with in the past for Lula rides. They would put their cars on the Lula rides platform. And I said, hey, this is what we're building for the US military. The idea, the objective is it's going to help reduce your insurance rates and it's going to make your business safer. If I build it, will you buy it? And I went to a ton of them, maybe 40, 50 of them. I would just walk into their offices or things like that. And over time, 24 of them signed letters of intent and 19 of them converted to customers. And
Wow.
so if you go ahead and you look at Gale, we were initially seeding Gale out of Lula. And there was a sales guy that was coming to us and said, I want to join Gale. And I said, we have no product right now. And he said, I don't care. I'm willing to give up all of my commission. I've been saving money the last couple of years. I want to be a part of Gale. And I said, dude, there's no product for you. And my brother said to him, Tito, if you really want to do something, here are my keys. I forget if he gave them my keys or his keys, but here are the keys. Go drive into insurance offices and figure out what do they think AI can do for them. Like literally go identify, are they interested in AI and what problems do they think they can solve? He went into never forget, he went to 6 agencies that day. 2 of them kicked him out. 4 of them actually let him speak to somebody. 2 of them, the owners came out, asked him to sign a letter of intent. He said, awesome, we'll send you that paperwork later today. He gets back to the office. There's no letter of intent. So the letter of intent that we got was we went to Elon's Cybertruck. This is when they were taking pre-orders. We copied that and we send that out as the LOI. And so my whole point being is if you have an idea, you want to go ahead and validate that idea as quickly as possible. You can validate that by taking pre-orders, by having people sign an LOI, by having people sign up. LOIs are non-binding, but they show some level of commitment. And so every single business that we've done, we've had a hypothesis and then we go ahead and validate it.
Yeah.
And if it gets validated, go ahead and put some resources behind it. If it doesn't get validated, go back to the drawing board. Now, you asked about coding and stuff like that. 10 years ago, I think it was a little bit harder. We really had to do a lot more work being non-technical and trying to figure out how to build an app. And I can talk to you about that for days. But today, one thing that I tell people, we even have this now in the company, there's no excuse for somebody that's not technical. Even if you're a product manager or something like that and you're not technical, we almost have done away with PRDs or product requirement documents. At this point, it's just build a prototype. Because tools like Cursor, tools like Replit, you can literally build a functional, not only prototype, but a functional production-ready app, website, platform. You can go ahead and do that with these tools. And a funny story there is we had an intern for the spring semester. I gave him a project. He spent 2 or 3 months working on the project. 2 or 3 months later, he comes back to me. He still doesn't develop this thing. I spent 3 hours on, actually it was Vercel, 3 hours, and I built what he was working on for almost 3 months. I built it in less than 3 hours.
Wow.
And I said, here you go. So the
Yeah.
tools today
It's a
are
different
phenomenal.
world now.
Yeah. You don't need to be technical anymore.
Yeah. So I mean, these are like really awesome anecdotes. I think one theme that's like really sticking out is that it's both that you don't really take no for an answer, but you're not like aggressive about it. You're just kind of like pivoting constantly. Like that's why you were able to go back to all of those VCs. That's why you're able to go to like these new businesses and say, hey, maybe this didn't work out. What about this new thing? I guess like, I feel like I'm just thinking out loud. I feel like the only way to really develop that skill is literally just going out and like practicing and like probably changing your mindset a little bit. Cause I know a lot of people are like, when they get a no or they get kind of like negative feedback, it really derails them. You know, they start to lose confidence. They start to, maybe like say, oh, maybe this isn't like a good idea anymore. I guess
Yeah,
like,
how did you build that
yeah.
confidence, right? Because it's like shooting shots, I guess. It's just a matter of you just keep shooting and eventually you get the confidence to keep shooting your shot. And you're just doing it in a business landscape versus the club.
There's we always talk about that. But there's a really interesting quote by Steve Jobs that just completely changed my perspective on things. And I'll never forget, it was around the time that I first met Ben. And I'm going to New York. I'm taking like one of these buses there. And I read a quote that pretty much said that everything that you see around the world was built by somebody probably not much smarter than you or much different than you. And so I'm walking through New York City. And I'm literally looking at all of these huge buildings and I'm looking at all of these cars and the taxis and all of these amazing pieces of property and technology and all of that. And I realized, I said, these things were at one point an abstract thought in somebody's mind and people that probably are not much smarter or more different than I am. And I said, if they could do it, why can't I? And I think that's where it came from. There was one aspect of look at what other people have built. Why can't I be capable of building that? And then the other thing that I like to do is I like reading biographies. And the reason that I like reading biographies is there was somebody that I thought put this really well to me. They said, I know why you like reading biographies. And I'm like, why? They're like, you like reading biographies because it's your way of looking at yourself or trying to find yourself in somebody else's story. And when you go ahead and you read a book like Sam Walton, or you go ahead about Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, or you go ahead and you read a book about somebody like the guy from Red Bull, or you go ahead and read about James Dyson, you go ahead and read about like Coco Chanel, all of these people. Now, Elon and Bezos maybe are a little bit different, but for the most part, put those aside, Phil Knight, the guy doesn't seem like he's this extraordinary genius. Maybe he
Yeah.
is, but what they look like is, or what they feel like is, they took a simple idea and they took it seriously. And they did that for an extended period of time. And so I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm capable of that. And so you asked where the confidence came from. The confidence came very much from seeing other people do it and say, hey, if they did it, I think I can do it.
Yeah. That's super powerful. I mean, I think that's like probably the most powerful belief system to have as like an entrepreneur, as someone in business, even just in life, because, you know, if someone's listening to this, right, they probably have at least enough intelligence to accomplish almost anything, right? Like obviously there's some things they'll never be able to do, but those are like such tiny outliers, and like it's not even worth thinking about that. Like you're maybe never going to be able to, like, you know, build a rocket ship or something if you're like, you know, only like kind of like sort of intelligent. But it doesn't matter. You could build like $100 million business because so many other people have done it with the same like level of intellect. It's just the work ethic and just the perseverance and like the desire to actually like succeed. And
I
that's
think
kind of
another
really what I've been
interesting
realizing.
thing too here is that, and we talked about this on the podcast before, is applying AI to what has historically been a legacy business or has been, you know, a barrier to entry to accessing a specific service. And obviously with insurance, it's always super difficult. It's very cookie cutter. There's a lot of specific examples where the legacy model doesn't fit, you know, new businesses and schemas, you know, that have been set up in the current economy. How do you look at other entrepreneurs that maybe want to start an AI business that kind of disrupts like a legacy model? Do you have any advice or learnings that, you know, you can maybe give other entrepreneurs who, you know, maybe are early to AI, see this opportunity, see like these older businesses that can potentially be disrupted? You know, we could probably list 1,000 old business models, you know, from car sales to, you know, whatever, right? And say like, oh, let's apply AI to that in some type of way. Like, what have you learned and what would you advise to entrepreneurs that might, you know, want to approach a model in a similar way to you have?
Yeah, I so there's a couple of things. So one really good formula for startups is look for really large markets, extremely fragmented with low NPS scores. Those are typically great markets to go ahead and disrupt. So really, really large markets are important. It's difficult to build a big business in a small market. So the market really matters. And look for markets that are extremely fragmented. So for example, browser search, really difficult to go into because there's only one company there, right? And then low NPS, look for industries where customer experience is subpar. So large markets, fragmentation, a subpar customer experience. And that's a great place to start. In terms of AI and stuff like that, I always tell the company, and this is something that people kind of bash me for, but I think so. I think it is. I always tell people your goal is not to build a technology company, or shouldn't be to build a technology company. Your goal shouldn't be to build a software or an AI company. Your goal should be to build an enduring company, a company that's going to be around in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to solve your customers' problems really, really well. Technology enables you. It's a tool that you use to solve the customer, but it's not the end. That's not the end goal. The end goal is to solve the problem for your customer and use technology to do that. So Dakota, when you ask, my perspective is identify problems. And what you typically want is you want to look for problems that people face on a daily basis or weekly basis, maybe a monthly basis. But if they're problems that people face annually or every couple of years, that's a really difficult problem to tackle because people don't think about it that much. So in terms of AI, to your point, there's a lot of problems in today's world. I think about that. People go ahead and say, are you bearish or bullish on AI? I'm extremely bullish. And the reason for that is I think technology, the definition of technology is it's a product or service. It's a better, cheaper, faster way of doing something. That's what technology is. And a business is, it's a product or service that makes somebody's life better. And so if you go ahead and you leverage technology to solve problems, you're going to solve problems better, cheaper, and faster. So now coming back to opportunities with AI, look for problems that people face, look for problems that companies face. I'll give you a problem that we identified very quickly. Insurance agents, for example, are open from 9 to 5. The problem is a lot of people shop for insurance once they're done with work, which is after 5 p.m. And so what happens, insurance agencies often have a ton of missed calls at 6, 7, 8, 9 p.m. And those calls, if they don't get answered, somebody's just going to the next insurance agent and the next insurance agent.
Yep. Yeah, there's no loyalty there.
No, it's not. So what you want is, how do you develop a system where 24/7, 365, your calls are captured, the information is taken, questions are answered, right? Okay, good. Gale, right? And then it was a simple problem. I mean, we're not solving rocket science. We're solving simple problems. And often if you're looking to sell to a business, your value proposition is really simple. People try to overcomplicate it and say, we're going to do all of these different things. No, a business is only buying your product or service because you either help them make money or save money. There's not really another option. Consumers a little bit different because maybe you help them look skinnier, maybe you help them feel better, but businesses really only buy two things: if you help them make money or save money. And so it's really simple.
Yeah, I think another question that we commonly go through is finding good people to work with. I think finding a team that scales, and obviously you can't do everything yourself at a certain point. You had mentioned the intern who took 3 months to do something that theoretically could have been done quicker, and like obviously that's just an example of maybe a partnership that didn't work out, but how did you find kind of like that initial team that helped you scale this venture, maybe your first venture, and then like what do you really prioritize in terms of finding either your initial partner or co-founder that you started the Gale with, and then as you kind of grow your initial team members after the funds that you've raised, what is really being pushed on you and prioritized to make sure that it's a rocket ship versus like a something that stalls out.
Yeah, I mean, in Lula Rides and Lula, I made so many mistakes hiring. So maybe what I'll go ahead and do is I'll just talk about what I look for now versus what I looked for then, because it was entirely wrong. And now I think we're a team of about 30, 35 people. And Lula's team was great overall. And despite that, I think this team will kick Lula's butt in terms of just how good the team is today. And the reason for that is I came to learn in Lula, for example, I always thought if the product is great and you're growing and sales are singing, everything else pretty much takes care of itself. I learned that's not the case. I actually learned, in my opinion, people are truly the most important part of the company. So answering your question specifically, Dakota, what do we look for when we're hiring? Well, the first thing is it's really difficult, and we have a couple of these folks, but it's really difficult to go ahead and hire a team of 35, 40, 45-year-old folks that you could actually afford. Because if they're really, really good, they're probably getting paid a shit ton of money by whoever's employing them because they're really good. We've been fortunate that we've been able to get a couple of those folks. They've bought into the vision. They're willing to go ahead and take lower pay in order for higher equity. Okay, that is fundamentally different than what most people, including myself a couple of years, was going to face. If I was going back and what am I looking for today, one of the first things you're looking for is you're looking for some sort of track record of success. If you're talking to a college student, if you're talking to a fresh grad, if you're talking to somebody that's pretty young or still in the early stages of their career, look for some track record of success. Have they won spelling bee competitions? Have they won chess competitions? Were they a D1 or D2 or even D3 athlete? It doesn't matter. Were they the president of their student council? Did they win math or debate competitions? Like, look for little things like that. Did they get good SAT scores? Did they go to good universities? Did they build a podcast that did really, really well? So the first thing you want to go ahead and do is you want to look for some sort of track record of success. And that can come in a variety of different ways. Why? Somebody that's successful in one domain often has the ability and the capacity to be successful in another domain. So that's number one. Number two, try to look for really intelligent people. And intelligence comes in all these shapes and sizes, all shapes, forms, and sizes. But people always say, what does intelligence look like to you? And that's really difficult to describe, but it's one of those things. It's difficult to describe, but you know it when you see it, right? But for me, what's a good way to define intelligence? Somebody that can learn really quickly. Somebody that can learn really quickly and apply whatever they learned to a new set of context that previously had not been thought about. So if you can look for somebody that has a track record of success, if you can go ahead and look for somebody that is extremely intelligent, you combine that with extreme work ethic. I mean, that's pretty simple. You want people that work really hard. And then probably the most underrated one, but probably the most important one is curiosity. I can't tell you how important curiosity is. If I'm talking to an engineer, for example, one of the first things I want to know is, how do you spend your free time? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you read books? Do you read blogs? Do you tinker? I love asking engineers, what do they tinker with? If you're an engineer and you're not tinkering, that's something concerning, at least from a hiring perspective. So basically, what are you looking for? You're looking for past track record of success, and you want to see they're kind of like a rocket ship. They're up and to the right. Experience is not so, especially for younger folks, experience is not so relevant. Some of our best engineers are folks that are 21, 22 years old. They come in and we throw them on the keyboard, and 2 days in, they're pushing into production. So
Wow.
experience is not always a litmus test. Some of those other factors that I just mentioned to you are more important. Now, when you're getting started, how do you get these people? I think there's a couple of ways that you get these people. I thought Sam Altman put this really interesting. One way to get really good people is actually solve difficult problems. So really intelligent people, really smart people will rather work on how to build a rocket ship that gets you to Mars that has 3% chance of succeeding versus how do I build a salty food company that has a 70% chance of succeeding. So people like working on hard problems, especially engineers. That's one aspect of it. But ultimately, it comes down to the founder and momentum. People love momentum. If you're getting customers, if you're getting deals, if you're getting LOIs or pre-orders, and you can couple that with a compelling story or compelling narrative, I think that's a phenomenal way to get started. And so that's another thing I tell people, figure out your story. It doesn't need to be what's your ultimate vision. Figure out what the pitch is,
Yeah.
and you're going to be selling. You got to get really good. So I would practice my pitch as I was walking, as I was driving, as I was in the shower, I was on the airplane, like just practice that pitch, because a lot of times you're going to be pitching people an abstract thought that doesn't believe, and you have to get them to believe. It's different from a VC. A VC is going to invest in 20 companies a year or 10 companies a year. A human can only invest their time in one company a year. And so to
Yeah.
get them to join your company, especially early on, you have to be quite compelling, and you have to have a narrative and momentum and traction, and all of that stuff certainly goes a long way there.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I've worked with a ton of startups, worked at a few startups, and I think like everyone says, yeah, the CEO's job, like the founder's job is really just like selling the dream, whether it's to investors, whether it's to employees, making sure the right people are in the right seats. Because that, like without that, I mean, it's very, you can of course bootstrap a business, but if you're looking to raise money and if you're trying to like have rapid growth, I mean, you need to get some of the best quality people that you can't afford, and you need to get investor dollars. So I mean, that totally makes a ton of sense. One thing I wanted to ask about, because we've had a lot of entrepreneurs on the show. We haven't had too many that have had kind of like exits. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like with Lula? And then, yeah, just talk a little bit about that and like how that kind of led to you starting Gale, which I don't know if spin out is the right term, but it kind of came from what you were initially doing with Lula.
Yeah, I got really fortunate. And what do I mean by that? Man, I hear this so much, and I don't agree with it necessarily. A lot of people say I didn't start this for money. So I don't think that when I started Lula Rides or Lula per se, I was sitting there thinking about money. I was like, I can't wait for this money. But there was an aspect of money to it. I was driven by, I did like the idea that I could make a lot of money, or that I could make money. I thought the project was fun. I thought what I was doing was fun. I loved what I did. I still love what I do to this day. And I'm really fortunate that I get to do what I do. But in the early days, at least from my vantage point and from a lot of the people that I've gotten to know, in the early days, you do get driven. Money is a big factor there. And you think about, and I don't think you start off with, this could be something really big. When I started Lula Rides and when I started Lula, I never thought that it would grow to be worth, at our peak, we were close to $600 million valuation. I never thought about that, right?
Wait, so did you sell like out of that business, or it just kind of just transitioned into this
No,
next business?
We sold.
Who'd you sell it to, if you can say?
We sold to a private equity group.
Okay.
We sold,
So it's
yeah,
not, you can't publicly disclose like the number, right?
I can't publicly disclose the number, but I'm like pretty good. I can say that.
Yeah. So you didn't need to start a new business. Like this is kind of just like you're doing it because you're just an entrepreneur. You want to like build stuff.
Oh yeah, I didn't need to start. I mean, no, I didn't need to start another business. I was good.
Yeah. That's awesome, man.
And yeah,
That's super cool,
Is your
man. It's
view as
so
good as
funny.
Sam's view over there? Or Sam's got a pretty good view over there.
yeah, we have a really nice view. If you guys are
Oh,
ever in
okay.
Miami, come by the office.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yo,
that's what we
Michael,
appraise exits on, views.
Sam and I live in Miami. I'm in
Oh,
I'm
you
in
do?
Brickell and he's in Edgewater. Yeah. We're newer to Miami than you, I think. But yeah, we live here now.
Yeah, it's a really nice view. It's a full skyline view in a brand new office.
Don't
It's
say
really
that to
nice.
Sam. He's gonna be upset.
Next time you guys are in the Gables, come by. It's very nice.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm super close to there for sure.
But you guys can work out here whenever you want. It's like a co-working space. I always tell my friends to come by.
Amazing.
But you were
So
asking
how
me,
quickly did you transition? Like, because it sounds like you, for some degree, took, IP or that you had the one business into the next business, or do you just saw this opportunity, transitioned?
Yeah, and just to add to that question, do you still have to work at Lula, or like was there a period of time where you had to work? Because I know that's pretty common in acquisitions. Like, are you still
Yeah.
kind of working on both?
Well, yeah, technically I'm on a 2-year earn out period. Uh, I don't get call it my big payday for another year. So it should be next May. I mean, I did.
We gotta get a yacht for that, man. Get a yacht and a helicopter, the whole thing.
Sam
Yeah,
will
but I
hook it
did.
up.
It's gone well so far. The big, the big days should be next May. But
Congrats.
thank you. But you were asking, the reason I went on the whole money spiel is because I got really like once I got. I mean, I'll give you guys the real numbers. Once I got to like, because if you ever go to my apartment and where I live, and everybody here jokes around that, I live like a very simple person. So I had the most normal apartment you've ever seen. I was driving a beat up car. I eventually got a nice car. But like early on, once I started making over 150K, 200K a year, like I realized that I didn't even have time to spend the money. And the company in many instances was covering my travel because I was traveling for all this stuff. So I didn't really have to think about money. And I came to realize that I'm like, I just really like what I do. I really like working. I really like building. I want to see how far I can take this thing and how big I can build this thing up. And when I say this thing, initially it was Lula, and now I'm like Gale. So the acquisition and Lula's rise, call it to prominence, that was an amazing ride. And I got to do it with my brother, and I got to do it with my sister who worked in the company. And it was amazing. I got
Oh, I
to
didn't know your sister worked there too. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
my sister worked at the company, and my parents, we've been able to travel the world together. That's been one of the most amazing experiences. I get to take them whenever I travel. Almost anytime I travel, I try to bring them or I try to get them involved. Same thing. My brother and I sometimes will be like flying from place to place and be like, wow, could you imagine? Could you believe this is our life? And so it's been a really awesome ride, and I've been really fortunate there. In terms of Gale, again, I'll give you guys the really basic economics. By the time that Lula was sold, I only owned like 8% of the company, right? And
Because
that's
of all the funding rounds.
all the funding. I made no idea what I was doing in Lula rides and Lula. So I took some angel investors that got really amazing deals. I'm really thankful for them. They gave us an opportunity, but they got really good deals for Lula rides. We never recapped the company from Lula rides to Lula. We kept the same
Oh
entity.
wow,
And
wow, good for them,
so,
man. Yeah,
yeah,
I should have thrown some money in.
yeah, you should have.
Yeah,
Classic
didn't really
Ben.
have too much money back then, honestly. I don't know
He spends it
what I've
all
been
on
able to do.
roulette.
But so Matthew and I owned very little of the company. We owned like 8% of the company, 9% of the company.
Like each?
Yeah, each. So
Okay,
maybe
all right.
9% of the company around there.
Yeah.
Anywhere from like 9, 10. I forget what the final number is. So when they came in to acquire the business, actually they wanted to acquire Gale. They wanted that IP, and Gale hadn't launched yet. So at the time it wasn't generating any revenue. And Matthew and I did not want to go work for the company. And it wasn't that I had anything against them. I said, I built a company to be pretty big, I thought. And I basically felt that I didn't need them, or I didn't want to go ahead and spend another 10 years building something for somebody else to make all of this money. So then we had to purchase the IP. So we purchased the IP from Lula, and we essentially, Matthew and I, put up personal capital, and then some of our investors, we went to them and we said, hey, you guys want to join us on this Gale ride? And they said yes. And so we went ahead and we essentially purchased the intellectual property for Gale, and then the associated contracts as well. So
Wow.
that was a separate entity that purchased that, and then we went ahead and we built that the acquisition went through in May of last year, but the separation and all of that didn't happen for some time. And so as of January this year, Matthew and I went full time on Gale. So January of this year is the first time that I was able to go full time on Gale. And in terms, then you asked me about Lula. I spent a couple of hours a month on Lula, but at
Wow,
this
not
point, I'm
bad at
full
all.
time Gale. No,
Yeah.
but it's been an awesome ride. And Gale right now it's actually growing faster than Lula, which is awesome. And a lot of not a lot, but a couple of my really good friends from Babson, them and their families invested in Lula. They did well. And so we went ahead and said, hey, why don't you guys come join the company like from day one? So we've been able to go ahead and we've been able to go ahead and ride with Gale almost from day one. With a couple of Lula folks, but also some of my best friends, my sister, her husband,
Wow.
and that has been just fucking awesome. I
Yeah.
love it.
That's incredible. I mean, that's like that ultimate story, man. Like you start something and you bring like the close friends, the close family along with the ride, and like everyone eats, you know, everyone
Yeah,
shares in the upside. That's amazing. Wow.
Dude, it's
Man,
weird.
it's so crazy.
I remember
Yeah.
one time Matthew and I went to Dubai and we had an amazing time in Dubai. And then we came back and it kind of felt weird telling my family about how awesome Dubai was and all that. And I said, all right, you know what? If I ever have the ability to actually bring them on, I'm going to do that. And that essentially started this cascade of like, let's try to get them to as many of these experiences as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Well,
super cool. That's like super impactful. I mean, that's like the dream I think for a lot of people. It's obviously the money has to be important unless you already have so much money where it doesn't matter. Like to be able to fly your whole family out everywhere, to be able to like allow people to enjoy life, because they invested in you or they're like working with you. I mean, I think that's really the dream for a lot of people when they really think about it. Like, why do I want to have money? It's to be able to create like an amazing life for myself and those around me, and that's incredibly powerful. Dakota, I know you're about to say something.
No, I'm getting a little crunch for time. I have another call I'm
Yeah,
late for.
yeah. I mean,
But I want to let you guys keep chatting. Mike, it was super nice meeting you. Really impressed. I'm also a Boston guy, so I appreciate everything. It's cool to see like a really strong startup coming out of Boston. So yeah,
yeah,
let's
the
stay in touch,
Boston,
and I'll let you
yeah, the
guys
scene
keep
there is
chatting.
awesome.
yeah, I
Yeah,
appreciate it. Thanks, Dakota.
yeah, Michael. I don't know if you have like a hard stop coming up. I mean, we can go
No, I
on. We
could
can go
keep
on a little
going.
bit longer. I mean, what I also, I want to talk. I mean, there's like so many things we could talk about. The family aspect, the way you structure this acquisition. I mean, that's like hours in an episode in and of itself. I also want to like what one thing we could talk about is current events, right? I think as an entrepreneur, as like I'm kind of like in the markets super super heavily. How there's like a ton of news, right? We saw the whole Elon and Trump. I don't know if you've been following that. Probably have. How do you let stuff like that impact the business, like impact like what do you do day to day? Like are you focused on macro factors at all, or are you just like really heads down, like we're going to be building our business and whatever's happening in the background politically in the economy, like it's interesting, but that's not what we're going to focus on. How do you think about those things?
So I'm a little bit different than most people. I actually genuinely enjoy politics. I know that's kind of odd to say,
Yeah,
but I do
I do.
enjoy
I do
politics.
too, almost to a fault, because
Mhm.
it can be kind of depressing. I'm sure you've probably experienced that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Exactly. So I'm actually really into politics. I'm into markets. I'm into both macro and micro events and so if you were to go ahead, we can go deep on on any of those topics I just mentioned, but there are moments where I catch myself and I'm like, all right, I need to go ahead and take a step back because none of these events are going to make a better product or build a better product for our customers. And I'll give you a funny example. Yesterday, I go on Twitter on my phone, see everything happening with Trump and Elon. And I said, dude, I'm deleting Twitter from my phone. I'm just going to because I knew I was going to be drawn in. And I remember back in 2021, 2022, first time I ever started to make a little bit of money, that I started to go ahead and trade. I was trading crypto, I was trading all of these stocks, and I came to realize that that was stressing me the fuck out. I'm worried about the market, I'm worried about all these stocks, and I said none of these stocks are going to make me more rich than my Lula stock. So the stock I should worry about is the one I have control over, Lula. So at the
That's
time it was
powerful.
something really controversial, but I literally just sold everything, all my crypto, all my stocks, and people will go ahead and say, oh, look at all the money you lost on crypto. I said, yeah, but look at all of the time, all of the energy, and all of the focus that I was able to capture back and put it towards my business and put it towards my
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah, I
So,
just to pause right. I mean, that's just such like an important point because I feel like what I do now full time is like investing, right? Whether it's public equities, the stock market, crypto, and then also real estate. So I'm like almost 24/7 in the markets. And people will come up to me and say, "Oh man, like what do I invest in? What do I do? What do I trade?" And I'm like, "Listen, like if you have a job, if you have like a business that you're building, I would just focus on that because this is like a full-time job, you know?" And
yep.
if you're going to be like doing a little bit here, a little bit there, just stressing yourself out, it's not worth it. You're not going to be successful in anything. And I mean, yeah, you're technically, yeah, you would have, made more money in the markets if you left it in, but the headache, like you're saying, like who would have known? Maybe you would have sold for tens of millions of dollars less in the business when you were negotiating with like the private equity firms. I think that's like an incredibly insightful point.
Yeah, it comes down to focus. I think that focus is probably one of the biggest factors. You could be an idiot, but if you have the ability to focus really well on a task or on a job, you're going to do much, much better than this brainiac genius who's just distracted by everything. I think that focus, it's interesting. One of my favorite podcasts is by David Senra from the Founders Podcast. And if you go ahead and you ask him, he's read like 400 biographies. if you go ahead and you ask David, what is the most important lesson that you've taken from every single one of the books you've read, just general theme, he'll sum it up in one word for you: focus. If you read the Walter Isaacson biography on Steve Jobs, there's 400, 500 pages of a biography on Steve Jobs. You get to the end of the book, the number one takeaway from that is focus. Steve Jobs worked at Apple for 40 years. We know him for 4 products. We know him for the Mac. We know him from the iPod. We know him from the iPad. We know him for the iPhone. 4 products, 40 years. I remember when I was reading that book, it was in 2023, Lula was trying to launch like 3 or 4 products. And I thought to myself, are you fucking stupid? Trying to launch 3 or 4 products at once? Steve Jobs launched like 4 products in 40 years.
Yeah.
Focus is so freaking important. And so that's what happened with the markets and stuff. It was not allowing me to focus. And I said, I need to focus.
Yeah. No, I feel a lot of that because one of my issues is I get a little bit distracted in the markets and I see like a new opportunity and I'm like, I'm going to put some money in here. I'm going to put some money in there. And then I listen to like Warren Buffett interviews, Charlie Munger interviews, and they're like, we sometimes make 1 or 2 big investments a year. And I think it's such a good point. And we have to, like, me, I'll just speak for myself. Like I have to kind of reel myself in sometimes. Yeah, I see a great opportunity, but you don't have to jump on every great opportunity. You don't have to hit 100, 5X's. You can just like 10X's. You could just put most of your money into just a few and have that be a 20X or 30X, and you'll still like do better. So I think it's a really good point. And Sam, he talks about this a lot. I mean, he's like hammered this point down. And he's really kind of like solidified it, where it's like consistency and focus. If you just do those 2 things, unless you're like in a really, really bad market or like, the business is like awful, you're just going to succeed no matter what. Now you might not have like a 9-figure, 10-figure exit, but like I would say realistically at minimum, it's going to be like 7 figures with enough time.
Yeah.
And I mean, just back to the political thing. I mean, I know we wanted to talk about this on this episode. What are your thoughts on Elon versus Trump? I mean, I have my thoughts. I can share them, but I'm curious. Like, what do you think about it? And for anyone who's listening to this and not familiar, Elon and Trump were just publicly like airing out a bunch of dirty laundry about each other on Twitter, and it looks like it stemmed from the disagreement over the big beautiful bill, which I've criticized. I mean, I support it over over nothing, but I've criticized it before. So what do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I thought it was really unfortunate. I thought it was really, really unfortunate. I thought that generally speaking, I do think that the country's headed in the right, I do think that the country's headed in a better direction than before. I'm still extremely concerned about the deficit. I think that's just one problem you can't outrun. You can't just borrow money forever. And I'm extremely concerned about the deficit. Now, I'm also, in terms of the big, beautiful bill, the BBB, I thought the tax cuts were great. And the reason that I go ahead and I say that is I don't think the US government has a revenue problem. People say, oh, we need more revenue. No, we don't. We need to cut back the spending. That's what we need to go ahead and do. And so from the vantage point of tax cuts, I thought that's great. I think the government is extremely wasteful with their tax dollars. If you give them $100, they're going to find $105. They're going to find 100. They're going to find 105 ways to spend it.
Yep.
Right. So I don't think the solution is going ahead and giving them more money. I think the solution is go ahead and cut. And that was one of the things that I was hoping to see from the Trump administration. I was very much hoping to go ahead and see that we would attack the deficit and that we would actually get to a point where the budget was balanced or that we had a slight surplus. And I was hoping for that. Obviously, Elon was hoping for that. And I think that, I was really disappointed when I saw the BBB. I know Stephen Miller and I know Mike Johnson and all these folks are going ahead and saying, no, this is the way that the CBO is being calculating this thing. It's misconstrued and all of that. And there's
everyone has an agenda. I feel the exact same way as you. Once Doge was a thing, I was very, very hopeful, almost to the point of like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen, but I was super hopeful, like, because I know, we all know that there's, I would say on the low end every year, $1 trillion to $2 trillion is kind of like wasted in fraud, abuse, and like other stuff. And the worst part is there's people like pocketing that money. You know what I mean? Whether it's like people scamming the system on the bottom or the people in the middle allowing for the scamming who are like those are the people making like a ton of money, like, and there's, hundreds of thousands of them each making, an extra few hundred thousand, upwards of a couple million. So it's obvious that there is like a lot of stuff that can be cut. And when Doge was just finding, 180 million here, 50 million here, and 500 million here, I was just like, come on, guys, like it's great. But, I started to get a little bit worried. I was like, oh, if this is all they're finding and this is all they're bringing up, it's kind of a bad sign. And on an earlier episode of the podcast, you might know him, Sahil Lavignia, founder of Gumroad. He was actually volunteering for Doge, and he kind of like publicly came out and was like, yeah, they just revoked my access one day. I was working on it, and now I'm done. And I think he was in like the Medicaid portion. I could be getting that wrong, but something like Medicaid or Medicare, where there's so many issues. So yeah, I felt a very similar way. I was hopeful, and when I saw the bill, I was like, listen, I like the border stuff, I like the tax stuff, but the spending is still out of control. And I guess, man, I don't know. I hope we're not at the point where we just literally can never change or decrease the spending. It's kind of seeming like that.
It does seem like that. It is extremely concerning. And I mean, one thing that the problem is that in many ways, the problem is, I think, take somebody like Elon, or take somebody, I think founders in general, in many ways, you're an idealist. You, in many ways, romanticize what the future could be and what it should look like. And that's kind of what gets you up. That's what gets you out of bed every morning. And I think that Elon was very much, and still to this day, is an idealist. And I thought that his whole back and forth with Trump was proof that he was not solely just doing this for his best interest. He was very much taking a pro-America stance. He went against the Democrats when it was necessary, and from his vantage point, he went against the Republicans when it was necessary as well. And so I thought he took a very pro-America approach. I think if you go ahead and you look at it from Trump's perspective, or Vance's perspective, or their politicians, at the end of the day, Trump is a business guy, but he's really become a politician over the last 10 years. And same exact thing for all the other folks. And the reality is that with politics, there's a lot of compromise. I mean, it's just insane, the amount of compromise we have. If you think about it, we have an executive branch that more than 50% of the population or something like that voted for. And yet a random judge out of fucking
Yeah.
Delaware is able to go ahead and just completely...
Random judge, like, I mean, don't even get me started on those judges, man. Like some of them shouldn't even be qualified to be judges, but
So the problem is, in order to go ahead and get a bill, so that's just one judge, in order to get a bill passed in the House and then to get that through the Senate, there's a ton of compromise that the politicians, i.e. Trump, Vance, Rubio, anybody, Mike Johnson on that side, the only way that they get the border bill, the only way that they get some of those
yeah.
tax cuts is if they go ahead and compromise the fuck out of it.
Yep.
And that's not something that you like. That's not something I like. That's certainly not something that Elon likes.
Yeah.
And that's extremely frustrating. And to me, it's not even a Democrat versus Republican thing. A couple of months ago, I'm not going to give too many specifics, but I was having lunch with a former House of Representatives, and I was seeing him in a casino, and the casino gave him $100,000 a year to spend because he helped them open the casino. I
No
said, what the hell is
way.
this?
No
And then
way.
I mentioned,
Wow.
oh, by the way, I like the bridge. The bridge is named after you, the bridge outside. He goes, yeah, we got the governor to give us $11 million. It only cost us $8 million to build it. I'm thinking, where the fuck is the other three?
And
But
yeah,
it's not a
someone just bought a
Democrat
new
versus
boat or something.
Republican thing. You just have you have these lifelong politicians that have made money on the backs of taxpayers, and they're not going to want to change anything. So Trump
Yeah,
had a preference. Do I want to get immigration? Do I want to get the tax
yeah.
cut? Or do I want to go? And so it's been really, really unfortunate from that regard.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective, and Sam, feel free to jump in here, because Sam actually has like a political show that he does, so he has a lot of thoughts on this. But yeah, I mean, I think, I understand where Elon's coming from, and I agree. In a utopia, I think he's right. In the real world, I think you have to move forward with the bill. I would try to get some extra stuff in there, some more cuts. But if the immigration issue isn't solved, I mean, most things aren't going to matter, because you get the more illegal migrants you have, like the deficit will just rise exponentially. So if that isn't stopped and people aren't actually like repatriated to some extent, you could cut Social Security to zero, and they're just, the Medicaid would just take that spot. So in the real world, I think like they probably should pass the bill. they should try to make some like last minute adjustments if possible. But if not, it's better than nothing. And just to the point about the politician, man, it's like, I've been reading a lot about this. And I've been thinking a lot about this over the past few years. We all grew up. I grew up in America. We all did, I think. And it's, everyone's like, oh, democracy, democracy, democracy is like why we're amazing, why we're this. And I'll be real. I mean, I like democracy, but I don't think it was ever intended for literally every single person to be able to like influence things, because if you're like not a net taxpayer, and if you're like a major net drain and you can vote just as much as anyone else, like you're obviously just going to vote for more free stuff for yourself. And we're literally seeing that, because it's almost unsustainable. I don't know how to fix it. It's like maybe they have to do something in the courts, but like you said, a random federal judge from nowhere, from some like random spot, can literally block something like that. So if you make an executive order, they can just block it. So I don't know. It's a little bit black pilling, just a little bit, but I still, net, I'm very bullish on the US. And I think like in history, we see things get bad. And unfortunately, like I've said this before, sometimes things have to get bad enough for that people wake up and they actually say, okay, we're going to have to make some real changes here. These politicians who have been like essentially robbing us blind for decades and decades, and the people who have allowed them to, there have to be some consequences for that.
Yeah. And the other problem is, I mean, you had there's a lot of sides of the aisle in the current administration, but look, Scott Bessent, obviously a really, really sharp guy. You have Howard Lutnick, you have Elon. So you had Elon that was going to cut $1 trillion. That was the goal, to cut $1 trillion. You have Howard Lutnick, whose job was to raise $1 trillion in revenue, right? That's how you're going to get to essentially a break-even point. And so kudos to them on that regard. They're essentially dealing with, on that front, they're dealing with judges who are trying to not let them save us money with US aid. You have you had a judge a week or two ago that went ahead and said we have to refund all tariff revenues. Thankfully, that's in an appeals process right now, so that's
Yeesh,
been
man.
paused. So we're not being able to go ahead and cut because we're trying to face all of these challenges. Then we're not able to increase revenue because we're facing all these challenges. And then in addition to that, and I think Scott Bessent, generally speaking, has been a net positive to the Trump administration. But you have Scott Bessent, who's coming out, he's Secretary of Treasury. He's coming out and saying like, hey, we actually don't want Elon to cut too fast. So why don't you want Elon to cut too fast? Well, for every $300 billion worth of expenses he identifies and he cuts, that's 1% of GDP. And so if we
Yep.
go ahead and we find $1 trillion worth of cuts, you're essentially reducing GDP by 3%. And he's like, that triggers a recession.
Yep.
And to me,
Exactly.
that is so ridiculous. This whole obsession with GDP as a proxy for
It's
whether progress is being made or not from an economics perspective is just
Yeah,
outlandish.
it's literally, and this is like, this was probably my favorite clip I've ever had from this podcast. Like just talking about how this entire system is kind of a Ponzi scheme, for better or for worse. Like it is, because if I give you $100 to do something, and then you give me $100 to do something, GDP is 200, but you and I are both back to the exact same spot we were, right? And I think the whole global economy is like obsessed with GDP, because it's this number that they can point to that points to like, hey, we have growth, 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 growth. And literally it's like, I've said this before, we are a growth at all costs economy. And this is why I was very concerned with the stock market, and why I've, more recently been selling more than buying, and taking kind of like short positions and puts, because as a hedge, because if you start cutting government spending, exactly what happens is, where's that government spending going to? Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, software that no one's using from like, Microsoft or whatever. Like these are great companies, great American companies, but there's so much fat and waste there. And it's very telling that they finally came out and said that, like, hey, don't cut too much waste, because it's going to really mess things up for us. And I guess the hopeful part is, if AI really does take over everything, then we can become so much more productive that we finally can then cut like the waste, and that the GDP won't go down, because everyone becomes so much more productive. But now you're left with, especially if like we don't fix the immigration issue, there's all these people here. How are they going to like survive? Where are they going to live? How are they going to eat? And that's, I think we're getting into really, that's more of a tricky situation. So there's no easy answer here,
Yeah, well,
from what I can tell.
I have a concern that the way that people have gotten rich the last, call it 30, 40, 50 years, is just fundamentally going to be very different over the next 30, 40, 50 years. And nobody seems to realize that. And what do I mean by that? If you go back to 1920, 1929, let's just go back about 100 years. The United States population was about 90 million people. If you look at worldwide population, it was about 2 billion people, right? If you look at where we are today, we're a lot more globalized today than we were in 1929. We have a lot more technology and a lot more productivity today than we did in 1929. And the United States population has grown from about 90 million people to about 335 million people. If you
Yeah.
look at the world population, we've gone from about 2 billion people to 8 to 9 billion people. So about 4x growth, both in the US and externally. So on the back of that, look at all the wealth that's been generated. The stock market, by the way, what's it compounded over the last 95 years? 9, 10% a year, give or take, right? Well, guess what? If you go ahead and you look at the next 80 years, you exclude Africa, you actually see population decline. Not increase, you see population decline if you exclude Africa. If you look at the United States population peaks around the year 2060 with about 380 million people. And then by the end of the century, it's about 360, 365 million people. And so we've gone the last 100 years, we've 4x population, both at the domestic level and the international level. We've become more globalized today than we were 100 years ago. We've had all of this technology progress, and yet the market's only compounded at, I'm saying only like if it's nothing, but it's really compounded at what, 9 to 10% year over year. So if you go ahead and you can't extrapolate that out for the next 80 years because we're not having the same level of population growth. So you're not going to see the same supply and demand curves. You're not seeing, I don't know if we're going to be more globalized. Actually, that's a big question mark. Will we be more globalized in 10 years, in 20 years, certainly in 80 years than we are today? I don't know. It doesn't seem like that.
Yeah.
And then are we seeing the same level of innovation that we were seeing 50 years ago, 100 years ago? I don't know. So this whole notion of like a GDP is going to be the best proxy for growth. Let's just continue seeing it get to
Yeah, I agree
5.
completely. I think, yeah, I this is why I a couple years ago have kind of changed my tune on index investing. And that's why I'm like very like active in the markets now, because I really believe, set and forget might have worked in the past with kind of all the variables that you're laying out, and like, the invention of like the 401k and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think that's going to continue. Now, I always think there's going to be good opportunities in business, no matter where you are, no matter what you do. It's just going to be a lot more skill based, and you're going to have to be like very skilled at finding those, whether it's like a company you're investing in privately, publicly, or even starting yourself. But yeah, it's you bring up a good point. Like I feel like people have a very hard time looking at the past and looking at the future, and then just like thinking rationally and like, does it make sense that this is going to continue? Is a population going to 4x? Like, probably not. It's just, you reach a ceiling at some point for a lot of stuff. But on one of your points, I do think the innovation will be the saving grace, if there is one, because I do think we actually might see more innovation than we have before. And then my personal concern is just figuring out how to have a society where there just might be so many people that really don't know what to do, whether it's for or professionally or personally or what have it, mainly professionally. That is a concern for me, because if there's so many people that are just like, I don't know what to do, like, you don't want them turning to like the negative things that could totally destabilize the society.
Yep. I hope that there's a ton of, I hope that we continue innovating at a rapid pace. And any way that I can play a role in helping innovate, I want to.
Hey,
That is what I want to do.
yeah,
I'm concerned that there may be too much red taping, or like Jamie Dimon says, blue taping. I'm concerned that we become too restrictive. And we become too restrictive, we suddenly start to restrict ourselves, and we start to go ahead and say we need to do this and that. Meanwhile, you have China just doing whatever they want, and they're going to go
yep,
ahead and take over. That's where I get concerned. I'm not concerned that America does not have the desire to innovate. I'm concerned that government squashes the desire to innovate, or the ability
yeah,
to innovate. And we see that in California a lot. We see that in New York a lot. And so
yeah.
that's where that comes from. And we have these protectionists and all these protectionist measures to go ahead and save the people from AI. But I think it's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that's why like Sam and I, we moved down here to Florida. Like, we kind of saw 2020, 2021 in New York, and it's untenable. Like, you are the enemy is the person trying to like do something,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's in business and real estate, whatever. You become the enemy. And you probably know the New York City mayoral race,
Yeah.
with like this guy, I don't even know his name, but he like literal like communist, you know what I mean? I'm not saying that as like an insult. Like,
No, no, I know.
he would be like, yeah, I'm like a total like socialist. Like, he maybe wouldn't use the C word because it probably doesn't sound good, but like 100%, just full on like third world country like communists. We have to freeze rent. We have to seize the means of production from like grocery stores so that prices stop going up, and it's going to make a better New York. And man, I'm glad I'm not a resident there anymore. Whether he wins or not, like the fact that he's like even in the running is a really really bad sign. And I guess it's good for places like Miami because a lot of the finance people will inevitably have to leave if that happens, and they're going to need to move here and open up offices and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like you're so concerned about cost. Well, allow us to grow more, allow us to generate more energy, allow us to get nuclear, right? You want the cost of goods and services
Yep.
to drop. Well, allow what's one of the primary drivers of that cost of energy. So reduce the cost of energy to as low as it can possibly be.
Yeah.
Reduce regulation. Do you know that today in California, it costs more? Eggs today, adjusted for inflation, cost more today than they did in the 1970s. How's that possible? How is it that we have all of this technology and all of this innovation?
And they weren't even, I don't think they were even doing like factory farming back then. It was just like
No.
the same level. It's just it's like the housing one is the craziest one. It's like,
You know that this is going to blow your mind. Number one, it's been a lie. Anybody that says there's water shortages, we don't have a water shortage. And desalination costs nothing at this point.
Yeah.
Do you know California has all these natural water reserves? They have all this fresh water, all this stuff, right? Israel does not. Israel has to desalinate all of their water, all of their drinking water. California, they may do it, but they don't need to. Water in Israel, in Tel Aviv, is cheaper than in San Francisco. I mean, that just goes to show you how absurd this stuff is. So it's like, yes, I agree. Housing rates in New York and just all over the place are out of control. So make it easier to build.
100%. And it's like, that's the litmus test, man. I feel like once you understand this, your whole life changes, because when you hear things like we have a shortage of housing, of water, of food, of all these things, you're just like, wait a second. None of that is true. Like you just look around, like, you fly in an airplane, there's no shortage of like anything.
Yeah, there's
especially
no
in this
shortage
country.
of land.
It's just literally the people who are preventing us from accessing that, whether it's through regulation or constant lawsuits or whatever. And those are the people that need to be kind of like brought to the forefront, and like the blame should be put on them. They should be the ones, not like the landlord is, renting out this apartment because it's rent stabilized. Yeah, like why would they? Who wants to make $300 a month on an apartment that's going to cost them, $1,000 a month in maintenance? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I mean, we can go on this for days. I know we've been going for a while. I want to be respectful of your time. One of the final things I want to ask you is, I mean, I'm super curious to hear your take. I feel like I kind of know what it is, but what do you think about Bitcoin and just kind of crypto in general?
Like, do I think it's a good or a bad?
Like, how do you think about it from two perspectives? One, as an asset class, when it comes to like kind of investing, how do you think about it as an asset class? And two, I guess maybe like net negative, net positive for society, like TBD. What do you think?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on crypto specifically. Let's talk about Bitcoin. But one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that I think one of the things that gets lost with Bitcoin is people tend to look at Bitcoin as having one singular purpose. And then if that singular purpose doesn't fit what you're seeing or the patterns you're seeing, you kind of go ahead and dismiss it, right? And I'll give you an example. If you're in the United States and somebody says to you, Bitcoin is a currency, you're like, no, it's not. It's a storage value, right? I don't know one person in the US, I could be wrong, but I don't know one person in the US that consistently and frequently uses Bitcoin to transact. Now they may do so.
There's no point. There's so many better cryptos
right?
for that. Yeah.
So in the US, from my experience, if you're in the US and you have Bitcoin, you're typically doing it because it's a storage of value more than it is a currency, right? Now, take my girlfriend. She's from Venezuela. Guess what? Guess how a bunch of Venezuelans, what do they use Bitcoin for? They actually use it as currency. They use it as a transaction. They use it to transact. And so to those people, it's not a storage of value. Now, maybe that's just a second order effect or a third order effect, but they use it as currency. And so I think one thing that's been challenging for me, it took me quite a long time to realize that Bitcoin has different purposes dependent on the audience that it's serving. And so if you're sitting here and you're looking at Bitcoin as a currency in the US, it's not going to make any sense for you. And if you're sitting in Venezuela or in a third world country and you're looking at it as a storage value, maybe you can get there, or maybe it's a currency to you, or maybe it's both. So from my vantage point, what do I think about crypto, or what do I think about Bitcoin? If there was one piece of advice you can go back to my 18-year-old self and tell them, I'd say buy Bitcoin. That would be, no, but generally speaking, when I think about crypto, when I think about stable coins, when I think about things like that, I think they especially stable coins, I do think that they're solving a real problem. I I love the idea that if I have stable coins, I don't need to have a $5,000 or $10,000 limit like I do on
Yep.
Zelle. I know
Yep.
some of the banks came out and said, "Oh, Zelle's like basically a stable coin." No, it's not. You're capped at $10 or $20,000 limits.
Yep.
I can only send so much money. It's not. It's just not. It's fundamentally no. It's not. That's not right at all. So, anyways, I, I think it's a great technology. I actually often find myself, I'm not a holder of Bitcoin. I've bought and sold, but I often find myself thinking like this is one of the most, in the next 300 years, this will go down as one of the most amazing, call it occurrences that some guy, whether it's a guy or a group of folks, were able to stay anonymous and yet build, call it a network, a currency, an ecosystem worth trillions of dollars. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, maybe I don't use it, but I think it's innovative, and I never want to be the guy that's going ahead and knocking innovation. And anybody that says crypto scams, all that stuff, U.S. dollars, the yen, pesos are used every day for money laundering and illicit purposes. So I don't
Yeah.
buy that with crypto either.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really thoughtful answer. Sam, were you going to jump in there?
I mean, I think he explained it really well. I mean, it's just different cases for different people, but it's, like he said, I think that this is going to be something extremely historic, very like a huge piece of history that, a huge transfer of wealth or transfer of how from old to new, stepping into the digital space.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
me personally, I'm very bullish on Bitcoin.
Yeah,
That's
I
good to
think
hear.
it's insane. Like I step back and I think about it, that it's actually worth what it's worth. And then I think like how insane that is. And I'm like, well, it's already so crazy, a million. Yeah, it's crazy, but like we're at 100,000.
It's the same thing when it hit 10,000. The
Yeah.
same talks were, oh yeah, 100,000. In your dreams, buddy. And we're
Does it?
really just at 10x away, and
Yeah.
we're still at a very low adoption rate in the grand scheme of things. I mean, with my eyes closed, I think we should be Bitcoin should be worth as least as much as gold in the long term. So that's my thoughts on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. If the adoption continues, I think it probably will. But I always wrestle with the price of these things because yeah, I like Bitcoin. I think it's a great innovation. But why would it be worth 100,000 instead of 10,000 or 5,000? You know what I mean? Like
I
the
feel like
functionality doesn't
I feel like
change.
looking if you look listen with people the way that people approach Bitcoin, if you approached any other almost anything with that same amount of skepticism, you could kind of see that anything's a scam. I mean, real estate is a scam. I mean, I bought a it's in that way where it becomes, once it becomes part of the norm, once it becomes socially acceptable. I mean, listen,
Yeah.
there's a lot
I mean,
of
listen,
yeah.
a market is, things are worth what someone else is
It's
willing to pay.
exactly it's dictated
So
it's
I'm not,
dictated by the people,
yeah. I mean, and I am, I don't plan on selling. I haven't sold any Bitcoin in 4 or 5 years and I'm not planning on selling any. Maybe at a million, I'll sell if we ever see that, but I don't want to take the chance of being the guy who sells it now and then like, missed another 10x or something. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, we've been going a while, Michael. I just want to say this has been like one of probably the most informative episode. I think your story is
Agreed.
super cool, and just for me personally, like literally that conversation that we had, she was definitely like yeah, like seven or so years ago
It was
now.
7 years ago. I was in the Regatta apartment building.
Yeah, yeah, it's like just seeing the difference between then and now, and I don't know, it's just like it's awesome for me just to see what you've been up to, and I've been following the stuff on social and whatnot, and it's been super cool, and it goes to like what the point that you were making, you know, you're a smart guy, right? You're a wise person, you think, but I don't think you would say you're like the smartest person or probably even close, and probably the same thing applies to your brother and like everyone else you're working, like a lot of those people you're working with, and none of that matters. You just had a vision, had a goal, and like were willing to adapt because when you got, like you talked about Lee Howard, like I met Lee Howard, he's a nice guy, but I haven't kept in contact with him. But it's
Yeah.
like you go back to people over and over and over again, and they see that you have this kind of like, it's that it factor. Like when I invest in startups, I mean, for me, the only thing that matters is the person, is the founders. Nothing else matters. Maybe if it's a series C or D, something else matters, but seed, pre-seed, it's literally just the team, because you guys could have started whatever company, it doesn't even matter. You would have figured it out and turned it into something else. And I think that's like the most powerful takeaway for anyone to have here, because yeah, you could think about the political stuff, you can think about Bitcoin, you can think about investing, whatever. But if you just develop that kind of mindset and action that you have, anyone listening could go and start something and 7 years later, be super, super successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you again, for coming on, dropping gems after gems. And it's a really good story where you could actually, you hear the whole rags to riches story a lot. It's kind of overinflated, but when you really see where you began and where you are now in such a short period of time, I mean, there's people who graduate college in 17 years. So that's incredibly impressive. And thank you again for coming on.
I appreciate it, guys. And we'll have to do another one next year after the year out, and I can talk a lot more.
Yeah,
bro, that one
we're marking that one in the calendar for sure.
Yeah, mark it for like a year from now. I'll be able to drop a lot more gems.
Oh
yeah,
100%. And, let's just end it right there. I'll stop recording. But everybody, this has been another awesome episode. Thank you to Michael again for coming on. We will see you all next week.